Well, thank you very much for letting me speak here today. The main topic for me today will be to talk about the regulators' expectations in concerning industry. I will just briefly touch upon the Offshore Safety Act, which was adopted back in 2006, in which is the regulatory framework for conducting and handling health and safe issues offshore. And then I'll talk briefly about risk assessment, some central issues about the involvement of workers on day-to-day operations, the importance of education, as well as training. And then finally, I will give you some statistics about how we're actually performing. And at the ending, I will let you know upon a new EU regulation which has been put forward now as a response to the Macondo accident 2 years ago. We are currently negotiated it here during the Danish EU presidency, and it might also have some implications for the way we do regulation here in Denmark, if it's going to be adopted in the long run. But let me start with the decision that was decided upon in the Danish Parliament only 1 month ago, stating that, of course, oil and gas activities are important to Denmark and to the economic activities in our society, that it has to be conducted with respect to already entered agreements, and finally that it has to be conducted in a safe and environmentally responsible way. This year today marks the 40 years anniversary of oil and gas production in Denmark, with the Dan field being established back 40 years ago. And there's no doubt that oil and gas production has been important to the Danish economy, and we foresee that it's going to be carried out for a lot of years to come. The Danish government is currently planning to launch out a strategy in order to increase the recovery factor from 30% to 50%, which is quite ambitious, using new expertise and new technologies. And this is a plan that is going to be outlined in close cooperation with the industry as well. Next year, we are going to license a new round, the 7th round in a row in the northwestern part of the North Sea, which is not covered by the open door procedure. And of course, we also hope here to engage new actors, new companies in oil and gas production. So this is an important area. Looking at the regulation at hand, which governed the offshore health and safety issues, this is the Offshore Safety Act, which was adopted back the 1st of July in 2006. And there are two central goals from this act. Firstly, it has to promote a high level of health and safety offshore, which is consistent with society's technological and social development. This underlines the dynamic nature of this regulation, that we continuously have to strive towards raising the health and safety standards offshore as well. And the second important goal in this regulation is to create a framework within which the companies themselves can solve safety and health issues offshore, thereby leaving much more responsibility on the sides of the companies, but also more freedom in their ways to actually do different activities and establish different procedures. So there's a larger room for innovation and a larger room for maneuvering on the side of the companies. And this is, you could say, the basic trend when we talk about regulation. Back in the Preexisting Regulation, which was adopted back in 1981 and was currently in place until 2006, the use here was prescriptive rules. So to speak, you had a Bible to look into to see if you did this and this and this, you were in compliance with the overall rules. Today, we use functional rules instead, stating the different targets that are going to be set, but then leaving it up to the companies themselves to a higher degree and a higher extent to engage in establishing management systems, the necessary procedures to establish a culture of health and safety offshore. So this is a new type of regulation, so to speak. It has been in place for 6 years. I would say that some of the lessons learned so far is that having functional rules, you need a much more close and open and trustworthy dialogue between government and the industry. You have to have a very close contact and an open dialogue. And that is also why we, as part of this new regulatory regime, have set up the Offshore Safety Council, where we have the industry, the employers, organizations, other governments who affect and have regulation concerning offshore activities, where we discuss new regulation that can have an impact on the offshore activities, and where we also draw out guidelines to say, to give an example of how to comply with the different rules and procedures that we have in our regulations. So that is also part of this Offshore Safety Council, which is a key element in producing guidelines for understanding and interpreting the regulation at hand. And finally, it has also stressed the need for new skills and new knowledge when it comes to health and safety matters. Saying a little bit about us, we are the Offshore Supervision Unit in the Danish Energy Agency. There are 16 employees, hereof 9 inspectors. We do 1 yearly visit to each manned platform. We do visit both announced and unannounced. We do visits both onshore to look into the management systems, the operational procedures, and so forth. And we do, of course, also visit offshore to look into the day-to-day operations and to see how they are handled. Looking at the North Sea sector, what are we looking at? Well, there are about 50 platforms out there, mainly built in steel, weighing up to 15,000 tons. Some of them are pretty old by now, but we have not yet seen, as is the case with the UK or Norway, any concrete plans for decommissioning in the Danish part of the North Sea. We have about 600 wells, hereof 400 that are active. We have 1,800 kilometers of pipeline. Some have been put out of use, and some is by now under more close observation due to the ending of their design life. And there are about 16,000 people employed in the industry, creating rather a huge amount of value, just to underline the importance of this sector also when it comes to the Danish economy and the Danish economic activities. What are the expectations to the industry then? Well, first and foremost, we assume that the industry have to take responsibility to provide solutions and to filling in frameworks and conducting self-monitoring and compliance. We expect the industry to do risk assessments to identify risks and take action to prevent accidents. And we expect the industry to preserve and increase workers' knowledge when it comes to health and safety matters by education, by training, by campaigns and so forth, as Mark mentions. And we expect them to establish an effective response to the consequences of possible accidents or dangerous situations. Some of the elements in the new regulation is, of course, risk assessment. You have to identify the hazard, you have to do risk assessment, and you have to bring it down to the lowest level practical. That is basically what we call the Alar Principle. And to be quite frank and honest, we are not there yet in how we actually go about interpreting the Alar Principles. Some of the documentations we have seen from industry might need some adjustment, and the transparency when you go about using the Alar Principle is not that clear. And that is also why we are now working closely together also with the industry to develop guidelines on how to handle the Alar Principle in reality, so to harvest the benefits from it. Then there is the whole issue of engaging the workers offshore. They do the day-to-day works to use their knowledge, their skills in handling risks and reducing risks as well. And of course, the safety organization is a key instrument in this respect. But I'd also like to give credit today to a lot of the different initiatives that's been taking, campaigns and so forth, to establish a permanent health and safety culture offshore. I'm sure that that's going to have a long and lasting impact when we look a couple of years ahead. Finally, the issue of education. If we're going to go from good practice to best practice, we have to engage in mutual learnings, we have to raise our skills, our competences, we have to exchange knowledge, not only within the industry, but also between the industry and the regulators. And finally, of course, we also have to prepare for the unplanned and the unwanted. We have to have an emergency management system, a philosophy about that, and emergency response organizations. We have to have clear communication lines, both onshore and offshore, a clear command structure for decision making, since time is the essence in these situations. And we have to engage with other preparednesses, both nationally within the industry and internationally. What is our contribution to this? What do we bring to the table, so to speak? Well, we, of course, supervise the compliance of the rules to see that they are in compliance with the regulatory framework. We do take out different themes in cooperation with the industry, focusing on different aspects of the working environment. For instance, psychosocial elements or economics. We do engage with a lot of the other authorities around the North Sea, primarily within the framework of INSO-RF, where we exchange best practice, knowledge, how to improve regulations, see if there are new information, new things happening that we have to take into account when drawing out guidelines. So there's a rather close cooperation between the authorities around the North Sea sector. And finally, we also do it on an international level within the framework of the International Regulators Forum, where we do it on a global scale. And as I said, we have the Offshore Safety Council, which is a key component of this type of regulations, where we meet together with the industry, the workers' organization, and different other authorities to discuss new legislations and to draw up new guidelines. So that is some of the elements. Looking at these statistics, as Mark also pointed to, we have the recent data from 2011 showing that there has been a 50% increase in accidents reported during the last year. 15 of these incidents were on fixed mobile platform and one on fixed platforms and one on a mobile platform, and they had mainly to do with slippery accidents and falls. It's difficult to focus on 1 year and one number due to the relatively low level of incidents that has been reported. So basically, we have to look at the long-term trend here, which is downwards, looking back from 2004. And as Mark also pointed to, if we compare it to other sectors in the Danish economy, the offshore industry is definitely do have a low level of incidents, for instance, compared to the construction sector and so forth. We do not have the recent data from the Ministry of Employment, but I'm sure that they will show the same picture as you can see on the slide here. But again, as Mark pointed to, even though the trend is downwards, we might perhaps have seen the end of the dip here, so we have to find out new solutions, new ways to consistently help to improve the health and safety standard offshore if we are going to continue this trend in the years to come. Finally, I'll just touch upon a new EU regulation which is the EU Commission's response to the Macondo accident, which happened 2 years ago and has to do with major accidents. It was put forward in November and is currently being negotiated during the Danish presidency. We are not going to finalize this regulation during the Danish presidency, but we are going to give a midterm report to the EU Commission, and then it's up to Cyprus to take the regulation further in the coming years. But some of the elements are risk assessment, which you have to document in a major hazard report, consent of activities by a national competent authority, that's the Danish Energy Agency. And there's also some elements where you are trying to separate that part of the government which regulate oil and licenses and resources from that part of the government which regulates safety, not to have conflicts of interest here. And that's also why we have made an organizational split in the Danish Energy Agency with different commando structures to handle any conflict of interest that could be between the economic side and the safety side. Then there's increased use of third-party verification of certain safety issues and public participations in procedures for awarding concessions. That is some of the elements there. But the main discussion at the moment is whether this is going to be regulation, meaning that it will have a direct effect in Denmark the day it is adopted, and with no room for interpretation. A directive leaves more room for the member states to do adjustments within the framework they already have today. So there is a major discussion going on in Denmark, but also a lot of the major players like UK and the Netherlands. A lot of the EU countries want the Commission to put forward a directive instead of regulation. The same goes for the industry, the same goes for the employers' organizations, but so far the Commission is still committed to putting forward a regulation in order to ensure a uniform implementation in all member states. But that is the main discussion at the moment, if it's going to be regulation or a directive, which leaves more room for freedom from a regulatory perspective. Finally, what will this mean to our regulation? It might be too soon to say, but it's worth to note that this has to do with major accident risks. So occupational safety and health regulations are unaffected, basically. It has a core element about risk assessment, which we already know, and which is also key to the way we do regulation today. It has a major hazard report, which is very much in line with the health and safety case. There is consenting procedures, and there is third-party verification, which is in Denmark today voluntary, but widely used, but it will be more used in the years to come if this regulation is put in place. So we'll have to wait and see. It's going to be, as I said, negotiated in these months here ahead of us, and then hopefully Cyprus will take over, and let's see if it's going to be regulation or directive and what the concrete impact will be for the industry in the years to come. Thank you very much.